Montana Territory, June 1883. The sun was barely over the rim of the mountains when the wagon lurched to a stop outside the churchyard, and every head on the porch turned. The whispers started before Beatrice Fuller even reached the steps, her skirts brushing dust as her 5 children scrambled beside and behind her like ducklings. "Lord, another one," a woman muttered behind a fan. "She ought to know when to stop," another chuckled. Beatrice kept her chin high, her back straight. She held her youngest, little Thea, on her hip barefoot again, her curls a mess. Tobias had ripped his only good shirt last night and Beatrice had stitched it by lantern light. Now, she noticed, the thread had already come loose again. "Keep walking," she murmured under her breath. She had lived in the Bitterroot Valley for nearly 3 years now, since her husband died trying to cross the Clark Fork River during a storm. She had come with 4 children and gave birth to Thea on the floor of a borrowed cabin that first winter. No midwife, no neighbors, just grit. She took the back pew again where they could slip out if one of the children started crying. On the far side of the church, a man knelt to help an old widow with her shawl. Broad shoulders, sun-burned neck, and a worn Stetson that looked like it had seen 100 cattle drives. Beatrice had seen him around town before, mostly at the feed store or hauling lumber. Samuel Ellard, the rancher who lived 2 miles out, folks said he kept to himself. No wife, no kin. Just a big stretch of land he worked alone. The service passed in murmurs and shifting feet. Afterward, as she gathered her children and tried to smooth their hair, a woman brushed by her with a tight smile. "Maybe leave some room for the rest of us next time, B." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. She said nothing. She never did. But before she could herd the children toward their wagon, a voice spoke behind her. "Ma'am, excuse me." She turned. Samuel stood there, his hat in his hands, eyes steady beneath the brim. He didn't glance at the children or flinch when Thea tugged on his coat sleeve. "I got a table," he said. "Big one, seems a shame not to use it," she blinked. "I sorry," he nodded toward the wagon. "I cooked too much stew and I built too many chairs." "Seems like you and your young ones could help with that." Beatrice blinked again, not sure if she heard right. Her children had gone quiet, all 5 of them staring at him. "You built extra chairs." Samuel gave a small nod. "Seemed like a good idea, just never had anyone to fill them." Beatrice hesitated. Thea leaned her head on her shoulder. Tobias stepped closer, his eyes cautious. "I do not take charity," she said quietly. "Good," Samuel replied, "because this is not that, it is supper, plain and simple." A long silence stretched between them, then she nodded once. "All right." The ride to Samuel's ranch was quiet, the only sounds the creak of wagon wood and the rustle of wind through sage. His house was tucked between 2 hills, with the snow caps behind and the river glinting down below. A vegetable garden grew wild beside the porch. The barn roof looked new, and true enough there were 8 chairs around the long pine table inside. The children sat straight and quiet at first, unsure. But then the smell of stew filled the room, and Thea giggled when Samuel handed her a spoon almost too big for her little hands. Beatrice stood by the window, arms crossed. "You sure about this?" Samuel ladled stew into bowls. "Sure as sunrise. You do not know me." "I know what it is to eat alone." She looked at him. His eyes were kind, not soft but kind, like someone who had been alone too long to be anything else. Later, after the children were fed and dozing on quilts in the parlor, Beatrice helped Samuel wash the dishes. "You planning on doing this again?" she asked, not looking at him. He set a plate aside. "If you will come back." The silence between them was not heavy. It felt like the steady hush of rain on a tin roof. Beatrice glanced toward the children, her voice low. "People laugh, whisper, say I should stop having them." Samuel dried his hands. "Do they help you raise them?" "No, then they do not get a say." She looked up at him. "Why did you build that many chairs?" He shrugged. "I guess I was hoping someone like you might come along." Beatrice did not answer. She just nodded once and stepped out into the cool night air, but Samuel watched her go, the porch lamp flickering behind him. And for the first time in years, Beatrice felt something warm settle in her chest, like maybe she was not so alone after all. The second Sunday they came, it was raining, not a hard rain, but steady, the kind that soaked the hem of a dress before a woman reached her gate. Beatrice had wrapped Thea in a shawl and tucked the boys under the wagon's oilcloth. She hadn't planned on stopping by Samuel's place again, not so soon, but the wheel had slipped in the mud near the bend, and by the time she wrestled it straight, the road to town was little better than a bog. Samuel had a fire going when she knocked. He opened the door with a slow nod, stepping aside without asking why she'd come. "You're wet through," he said. "Bring them in." She didn't argue. The children peeled off coats and boots and huddled by the fire, steam rising from their shoulders. Beatrice stood near the door, hands still on her hips, watching the rain streak down the window panes. "I'll help with supper," she said. "You'll sit first," he answered. He handed her a cup of warm cider, the edge of his thumb brushing her knuckles. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at him either. Instead, she watched Tobias and Ellie try to show Samuel's dog how to fetch a carved stick. The dog, an old thing with a limp, refused to move from the hearth. "I didn't know you had a dog," she said. "Found her limping near the creek last winter. Thought she'd die by morning. She didn't." "What's her name?" "Doesn't answer to anything, but I call her Mabel." Beatrice smiled faintly. Not because of the name, but because Mabel had shifted her head onto Thea's lap and sighed like she belonged there. "I'll mend that hem," she said, nodding toward the torn curtain near the doorway. Samuel glanced at it. "I hadn't noticed. You've got eyes." "You noticed?" "I just figured it wasn't hurting anyone enough to bother. Still, it's a thing that needs doing." He set a bowl of flour on the table and reached for the lard tin. "You always fix what's broken?" he asked. "If I don't, no one else will." The fire popped. Outside, the wind bent the grass toward the hills, and the rain softened into mist. Samuel worked dough between his hands, his movements slow and practiced. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Beatrice looked up from the chair she'd taken near the stove. "Where would I go? Someplace easier. Warmer, where folks don't look sideways at you." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't think there is a place like that." He didn't press. The room filled with the smell of baking, and the children's voices faded into drowsy murmurs. Later, after they ate and the children slept under quilts again, Beatrice gathered her shawl and turned toward the door. She paused. "You're not like the others," she said. Samuel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I never cared much what they thought. You live here, same as them." "I work here, that's not the same." She studied his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he didn't shift under her gaze. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "What?" "Having someone to sit across from." "At supper." He didn't answer right away. Then, more than I let on, Beatrice nodded once. The wind had died down, and in the hush that followed, she heard a nighthawk cry down by the river. "I'll bring preserves next time," she said, hand on the latch. His voice was quiet. "I'll build a shelf for them." She didn't smile, but her eyes held something softer than they had when she first walked in, something that hadn't been there in a long time. The first frost clung to the meadow grass when Beatrice hitched the wagon outside Samuel's barn. The air was sharp and clean, and her breath rose in steady clouds as she shifted Thea's weight on her hip. The boys had outgrown their boots again. Ellie's toes poked through the front, and Ruth's braid had come undone halfway through the ride. But none of them complained. Not anymore. Inside the barn, Samuel was splitting logs. His sleeves were rolled, his hands steady. He looked up when the children ran ahead, a quiet nod passing between them before he leaned the axe against the wall. "You came early." "Ruth said she wanted to learn how to milk a cow," Beatrice said, setting Thea down. "I suspect she just wants to pet one. She can do both." The cow shed was warm with hay, and Ruth's laughter drifted out with the steam. Thea toddled after her brothers toward the trough, and Beatrice stood beside the barn door, arms folded against the cold. "You keeping busy?" she asked. "I've been fixing the south fence." "Elk keep pressing through it. You work too much. If I don't, the place will fall apart." She glanced toward the house. "You said you grew up further east. What brought you all the way out here?" Samuel rubbed the back of his neck. I left Missouri the year after the war ended. Too much left unsaid back there. I know what that's like, she said. You were born here, Arkansas. We moved west when I was a girl. My daddy thought the land would give us more than it did. He nodded. Land makes promises it doesn't always keep. Beatrice turned her face toward the trees. My oldest, Jonah, was born during a thunderstorm. I always thought he'd grow into a man who carried weather in his bones. Seems like he might. He's too quiet to say. That's not always a bad thing. She looked at him then. You don't talk much, but you listen. I figure talking's only useful when it says something worth hearing. She stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You always planned to be alone out here. I thought I had to be. And now, he met her eyes fully then. I'm not so sure. The children spilled out of the shed, cheeks pink, hands full of feathers and seed pods. Samuel crouched to help Thea tie a bootlace, his fingers clumsy but patient. Beatrice watched him, her throat tightening just slightly. Later in the kitchen, she helped him carry jars into the pantry. He reached for a shelf above her head and his elbow brushed hers. She didn't step away. You built this house yourself, she asked. Took 3 winters. That's a long time to wait for walls. They kept me breathing. She turned to face him. You built it like you were expecting someone. I was, he said. I just didn't know who. Her voice was low. And now, he rested his palm lightly on the doorframe, not touching her. Now I think I do. She didn't answer at first, just looked up at the beams, the slow dance of dust in the air. I never expected kindness from a man again, she said. Not after Henry. Samuel didn't ask for more than what she gave him. His voice was steady. You don't owe me anything? I know, she whispered. That's part of why I trust you. In the stillness, the fire crackled in the hearth and the children's laughter echoed softly down the hall. Beatrice reached for his hand, calloused and warm, and held it. I could bring more than preserves next time, she said. He nodded, his voice quiet. You could bring whatever you like. And she knew, in some wordless, certain way, that her place at that table was no longer borrowed. It was built for her. By late November, snow had begun to settle in the folds of the Bitterroot Hills. It hadn't yet reached Samuel's property in full, but the mornings had turned brittle, and smoke curled from the chimney long before the sun rose over the ridge. Beatrice arrived just after dawn, bundled in her thickest shawl, a basket looped over one arm and her children wrapped in layered scarves and wool. Samuel was outside mending a broken hinge on the chicken pen. He glanced up at the sound of wagon wheels, wiping his hands on a strip of canvas. You're early. I couldn't sleep, Beatrice said, stepping down, and I promised the boys they could help gather kindling. Plenty of it around the south line, he said. Watch for fox prints, Beatrice nodded. I packed bread and boiled eggs. We'll eat here if that's all right. It is. She followed him toward the house while the children peeled away toward the tree line, Ruth calling after Tobias to wait up. Beatrice's boots crunched over frost-hardened earth and her breath drifted past her shoulder. Inside, the warmth of the hearth greeted her. She set the basket on the table, unwrapping the cloth from the food. You've been working on the lean-to, she said, glancing through the window. I needed a place to store the oat sacks, Samuel replied. And a shelter for the mule. You always build like you're preparing for more. He turned from the stove, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe I am. Beatrice took a seat, clasping her hands together to warm them. The silence between them was comfortable, like a coat worn soft at the seams. I never asked, Samuel said, what you liked to do before all this. Beatrice looked up. Before the children, before Montana, before you had to do everything alone, she thought for a moment. I used to draw. Charcoal mostly, faces, hands, things that didn't keep still. Do you still? I haven't had paper in years, and I don't have the stillness for it anymore. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat. I think you do, you just haven't been asked to be still. Her eyes lingered on him. Did you ever want a family? I did, he said quietly, but wanting and having are different things. I spent too long thinking I had to earn the right. You don't have to earn anything from me, she said. You've already given us more than I ever expected from anyone. Samuel reached into the drawer beside him and placed a folded cloth on the table. Beatrice opened it slowly. Inside were several sheets of thick paper, tied with twine, and a small roll of charcoal wrapped in oiled linen. "Tobias told me," he said, "about the sketches you used to make on the wall with ash. Thought maybe you'd want something better." Beatrice touched the edge of the paper with careful fingers. Her voice caught. "You remembered." "I listen," he said. She looked across the table at him, her hand resting over the paper. "What do you want from me, Samuel?" "Only what you're willing to give." Beatrice stood, walking to the window. The children were halfway down the slope now, their footprints a trail of small steps in the frost. She turned back to him. "I don't know how to be with someone anymore," she said, "not without waiting for the day it's taken away." "You don't have to know," he said. "You just have to stay." She was quiet for a long while, until the kettle hissed and the warmth of the room wrapped itself around her shoulders like a quilt. "I could draw the children," she said, softer now. "Make a book of them. So they know where they came from." Samuel rose and crossed the room. He didn't touch her, only stood beside her, both of them watching the hillside together. "You could draw this place too," he said. "So they remember where they were loved." Beatrice turned toward him. "I think I'd like that." By December, the wind came down from the mountains like a knife, and the river froze in quiet layers. Beatrice's boys chopped wood at Samuel's side now, hands red with cold, faces solemn with the rhythm of work. Ruth helped inside, folding linens with care, while Thea napped in a cradle Samuel had carved from pine. Beatrice stood at the table shelling beans, her back to the fire. Samuel was mending a harness strap near the window, quiet but present, the way he always was when the house held more than just his own footsteps. She glanced over her shoulder. "You ever had someone live here with you?" He didn't look up. "No, you ever wanted to. I didn't think I'd be good for it." She wiped her hands on her apron. "What changed your mind? You started coming back." The kettle began to rattle. Beatrice poured water into the basin, steam rising around her face. "I've been thinking about spring." He set the strap aside. "What about it? I could plant in that empty patch west of the barn, potatoes, maybe squash. You've got good sun there." He stepped closer, the chair scuffing the floor behind him. "You're thinking of staying?" "I am." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. That night, after the children had fallen asleep in their beds, the boys in the loft, Ruth and Thea curled on a mattress near the stove. Beatrice stepped out onto the porch. Snow had started falling, slow and quiet, the kind that softened the whole world. Samuel came out behind her, pulling his coat tight. For a minute they watched the flakes catch on the eaves. "My daddy used to say winter tells the truth about a place," she said. He glanced toward her. "What's it told you?" "That this place is honest, and that I'm not afraid of it anymore." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a silver ring, plain but carefully made. The band was shaped like a braid, the metal worn smooth at the edges as if he'd turned it in his hands more than once. "I bought it last year," he said. "Didn't know what for, just kept it." Beatrice held it in her palm. "You sure?" "I've never been more." Her hand closed around it. "Then I'll wear it." They didn't kiss. Not right then. But they stood together under the snow, the quiet between them full and deep, like a house after the lamps are lit. The following weeks passed without ceremony. She packed her things from the old cabin, moved the last of the children's books into the low shelf Samuel built by the hearth, and hung her mother's faded quilt on the wall above their bed. He cleared the spare room for the boys. Ruth helped him choose fabric for new curtains. Thea learned to say his name. They didn't speak of what had come before. There was no need. The past had done its work. It had shaped them, carved them down, and left them sturdy enough to carry one another forward. On the first mild afternoon in March, they stood side by side in the garden bed, her hand resting on the small of his back as he tilled the soil. The children ran through the field, their laughter rising over the thawing creek. Beatrice looked at the house, the porch repaired, the windows clean, the door wide enough for all of them. "I never thought I'd find peace again," she said. "You didn't find it," Samuel said. "You built it." He took her hand. She let him. They married at the table one quiet Sunday, with Ruth holding Thea and Tobias reading from the family Bible. No guests, no preacher, just vows spoken with hands clasped and eyes steady. Years later, when the children were grown and the fields bloomed each spring with potatoes and squash, Beatrice still took charcoal to paper each evening, sketching faces lined by wind and laughter. Samuel kept the shelf stocked with jars she filled, and the cradle he carved rested in the corner with a quilt folded over its side, waiting for the next child who might need it. And though the winters still came hard and silent and the work never ended, the house never stood quiet again. It echoed with voices, with warmth, with love built slow and steady like a table crafted for more than one. They grew old in that place, together, steady as the land beneath them,